It's my great privilege to invite the first of our guests from the USA, Judge Michael Mukasey. Judge Mukasey was the U.S. Attorney General from 2007 to 2009. He has been a judge for 25 years, 18 of those years as a federal judge. And during his career, he presided over many of the most important terrorism cases, so he is a leading international expert on the use of law and terrorism. It's my great pleasure to give the floor to Judge Michael Mukasey.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you to the committees that organized this conference. Thank you to the brave and gracious Mrs. Rajavi, and for the privilege of this microphone at this time. Back in December, I pointed out that we are at one of those moments in history when we know that future generations will ask what we did to advance what is good and what we did to resist what is evil. If anything, in the brief span of a month, the conditions that we are here to address have become more urgent. As before, militant Islamism threatens to destroy civilization as we know it, and at the very center of that threat is the regime now in control of Iran, which oppresses its own people and threatens its neighbors and the world at large by pursuing a program to develop a nuclear weapon that it is said repeatedly it will not hesitate to use. Just days ago, the regime in Iran gave the world additional proof of what it is all about, to go with the mountain of proof that we already had. They executed Jafar Kazemi, a 47-year-old father of two, and Mohammed Ali Haj Akhai, simply for visiting Camp Ashraf, where MEK residents are holding out, despite the efforts of Iran and its collaborators among the Iraqi authorities to drive the residents back to Iran or to destroy them. We also saw on Saturday the completely unsurprising collapse of the P5+1 talks in Istanbul, held for the purpose of trying to get the Iranian regime to abandon its nuclear weapons program rather than incur additional sanctions. In 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, the residents of Camp Ashraf surrendered their weapons, the weapons that they had available to defend themselves, and accepted a written confirmation from the then Deputy Commander of Multinational Forces in Iraq, General Jeffrey Miller, on behalf of the United States, that they were protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. From 2003 until 2009, the United States protected the residents of Ashraf and fulfilled the solemn obligation we had undertaken in 2003. But in January 2009, as some of you may be aware, the United States turned over the responsibility for security to Iraqi security forces. Before that transfer took place, General David Petraeus said the United States had been assured by the government of Iraq that the residents of Ashraf would be protected, and that he was proceeding with the transfer of security responsibility based on that assurance. Obviously, the residents of Ashraf have been a great source of anxiety to Iran, which would like nothing better than to see them forcibly repatriated to Iran, or at least crippled, so they cannot pose a threat to the regime. Iran has brought increasing pressure on the Iraqi government within the past month. The situation of the residents of Camp Ashraf has grown even more perilous. On January 7, 2 days after a visit to Baghdad by the Iranian foreign minister, the residents of Camp Ashraf were attacked by people acting at the direction of the Iranian Quds Force, stationed at the Iranian embassy in Baghdad, in cooperation with officials of the Iraqi government, and several were injured seriously. The Iraqi security forces either turned a blind eye or actually helped the attackers, even though the government of Iraq promised the United States that it would protect the residents of Ashraf. Those Iranian forces, supported by Iraqi forces, have placed at the gates of Ashraf, as you heard, some 180 loudspeakers that are used to threaten and harass the residents day and night, and to prevent them from sleeping. The psychological pressure has been ongoing for almost a year. Medical care continues to be denied to residents of Ashraf, and at least one patient died in December due to lack of care. This is history repeating itself. In June 2009, Nouri al-Maliki, head of the Iraqi government, visited Tehran supposedly for private reasons. The next month, in July of 2009, Iraqi security forces attacked the residents of Ashraf. To add insult to the United States, to the injury suffered by the citizens of Ashraf, that attack took place during a visit to Iraq by Defense Secretary Robert Gates. In spite of this obvious slap to the face of the United States government, and in spite of the solemn assurances given the American military when the residents of Ashraf surrendered their weapons in 2003, our Secretary of State, when she was questioned about it at that time, said the attack was an internal matter for the government of Iraq, not a concern of the United States. You know, sometimes I think that people in government and in the academy value subtlety for its own sake. After all, it's easy to understand simple and direct things, but subtle things seem to provide a great attraction because it takes a subtle mind to understand them. Well, there comes a time when we have to stop looking for subtle solutions like engagement and inducement and start becoming aware of what is obvious. One thing that is obvious is that the mullahs are not about to be sweet-talked into behaving. The second obvious thing is that we have at hand, if only we will recognize it, the means to help end the grip of the mullahs on the Iranian people. The MEK is that means. We speak of and recognize the dangers of Islamism, but real change that is nearly impossible from outside the Islamic world. However, MEK is a moderate Islamic organization committed to establish a secular, democratic, nuclear-free Iran. And yet, instead of help and encouragement to MEK, the United States instead lists MEK as a foreign terrorist organization, and in doing that, provides help and cover to the Iranian regime in carrying out executions like those I spoke of a moment ago, which Iran can then turn around and say were executions of terrorists, even in the view of the United States. This is not a partisan issue in the United States between Republicans and Democrats. The history goes back to the 1990s during the Clinton administration, when the People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, known as the MEK, was designated by the Secretary of State under U.S. law as a foreign terrorist organization. That designation continues to this day. It continues to be, as it was at the outset, unjustified. The rationale at first was that this designation of MEK would help engage the regime in Iran. Sadly, the designation continued even during the administration in which I served, in part because it was feared that if MEK were delisted, Iran would provide IEDs and other assistance to the insurgents in Iraq, which of course it's doing anyway. There's an opportunity to change that dynamic immediately and dramatically by removing the designation of MEK immediately. This would have two effects. First, it would show the current regime that we mean business and that we are prepared to take all necessary steps to bring pressure on the regime. This should be accompanied by making available communications equipment that can be used by those seeking regime change. This would make up in part for our weak response in June, when young Iranians were putting their lives on the line, and all we did was to wring our hands. As many of you know, MEK has petitioned the U.S. State Department to be removed from the list of foreign terrorist organizations. It is clear that the Iranian regime believes that time is short, and it would like nothing better than to have the residents of Camp Ashraf driven out before MEK succeeds in being removed from a list that it should never have been on in the first place. Why is this timing so crucial? Because if the residents of Camp Ashraf are still there when the designation is removed, then the United States and the Iraqi government will have no choice but to protect them. The designation gives those in the Iraqi government who want to curry favor with the Iranians their only excuse for not protecting the residents of Ashraf. Here, of course, it bears mention also that the MEK has been removed from any list of terrorist organizations in the United Kingdom and in the European Union. There are simply no good reasons for continuing to brand as terrorists a group of people who, so far as anyone can tell, are interested only in bringing to their country the blessings of the kind of liberty that we in the United States enjoy. The Iranian regime is now in the enviable position of having the United States designate as a terrorist organization a group of Iranians who are a threat to the regime, and of limiting that group's activities. In other words, the Iranians now have the great Satan working for them. And of course, the continued designation of MEK as a terrorist organization gives great comfort to the Iranian regime by putting on the sidelines an organization that's potentially a grave threat to it. It also provides added justification to the regime to execute MEK members in Iraq and to insist that in doing so it is fighting terrorists. What is to be done? Well, as I mentioned, there's an ongoing case in which MEK has challenged the designation. In July of 2010, as you heard, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit issued an opinion, essentially sending the matter back to the State Department and the Secretary of State and asking her to reevaluate whether MEK should be on that list. But the Court did something more than that, did something unusual. It expressed a good deal of skepticism about at least the non-classified information that was submitted to the Court. Without getting into too much detail, the Secretary of State may choose to make her determination entirely on classified information. But she did not do that in that case. She said she based her decision on both the classified information and the non-classified information. The Court discussed the non-classified information and revealed that a lot of it consisted of unsubstantiated and anonymous rumor whose reliability was unknown and could not be tested. If the classified information, part of the record, which MEK has not been able to see and which it cannot therefore respond to directly, consists of the same sort of information, then the Secretary of State's decision has no basis whatsoever. As you are aware, there is a growing consensus inside the United States and outside it to delist MEK. An ever-increasing number of members of Congress supporting a resolution favoring that result shows the degree of consensus in the United States. It is a bipartisan consensus. In the middle of the 19th century, Abraham Lincoln referred to the United States as the last best hope of earth. I think those words are even truer in the 21st century than they were when Lincoln first spoke them in the middle of the 19th. I think also that it's time we started talking and behaving as if we believe them, so that when succeeding generations consider the question of what we did to advance what is good and to resist what is evil, they will find an answer that we and they can live with. Thank you again for the honor of speaking to you.